The envelope arrived exactly 1 year after the funeral, its crisp, white edges standing out against the pile of unpaid bills and sympathy cards that still littered my kitchen counter. The return address made my heart skip: FBI headquarters, Quantico, Virginia. Inside was a single photograph of my parents standing beside a man I'd never seen before, and a handwritten note. "What your aunt told you was a lie. Call this number when you're ready for the truth." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elise Morgan. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how I discovered my entire life was built on a foundation of carefully crafted lies. The kind of lies that don't just deceive, they destroy. The kind that rewrite history, erase identities, and steal futures. For 13 months, I had believed my parents died in a tragic car accident while vacationing in Colorado. I'd grieved them, buried empty caskets when their bodies were too damaged to view, and reluctantly moved into my childhood home under the watchful eye of my Aunt Caroline. Caroline had always been a distant figure in my life, my mother's older sister, who appeared at holidays with expensive gifts and disapproving glances. She was everything my mother wasn't: coldly successful, childless by choice, and meticulously put together. Growing up, I'd catch snippets of hushed arguments between them, tension that my father would dismiss with a wave of his hand. "Family is complicated," he'd say, "but it's still family." After their deaths, Caroline became my unwanted guardian angel. She flew in from Chicago, handled the funeral arrangements with clinical efficiency, and announced she would be temporarily relocating to help me get back on my feet. I was too numb to argue, too lost in the fog of grief to question why she suddenly cared so much about the niece she'd barely acknowledged for decades. The changes were subtle at first. Caroline insisted on sorting through my parents' belongings, boxing up photos and mementos before I could properly look through them. "It's too painful right now," she'd say, her voice soft but her eyes sharp. "I'll keep everything safe until you're ready." She redirected their mail, changed their phone numbers, and discouraged me from contacting their friends. "People don't know what to say to the bereaved," she explained. "Give them space." I surrendered to her guidance, too exhausted to resist. My job as a wildlife photographer had once taken me to the farthest corners of the earth, but in the months following their deaths, I could barely leave the house. Caroline managed everything: the mortgage payments, the insurance claims, the steady stream of casseroles from neighbors whose names I couldn't remember. She became my tether to a world that had lost its color. Until the nightmares started. They always began the same way: my parents standing on the edge of a cliff, waving frantically as I approached. But when I reached for them, they would transform into strangers with hollow eyes and mouths sewn shut. I'd wake up gasping, sheets drenched in sweat, with the distinct feeling that I was missing something important, something obvious. On particularly bad nights, I'd sneak into the attic where Caroline had stored the few boxes of my parents, things she hadn't organized yet. I'd run my fingers over my father's well-worn field journals. He'd been an environmental scientist with a passion for endangered butterflies, and breathe in the fading scent of my mother's favorite cardigan. She'd been a high school art teacher with paint perpetually embedded under her fingernails, and a laugh that could fill a room. They had been happily, almost aggressively ordinary people, which made the FBI envelope all the more bewildering. "Do not share this information with Caroline Westfield," the note concluded. The warning sent ice through my veins. Why would the FBI know my aunt's name? Why would they caution me against her? The photograph offered no clear answers, just my parents, slightly younger, standing next to a stern-faced man in front of what looked like a government building. The back of the photo was stamped with a date from 15 years earlier and the words "Operation Kingfisher." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I tucked the envelope beneath my mattress, heart pounding. Caroline had been checking my mail for months. To spare you from insensitive marketing, she claimed, which meant someone had deliberately bypassed her. Someone who didn't trust her. The thought was both terrifying and strangely validating. The unease I'd been feeling wasn't just grief, it was intuition. That night, I waited until Caroline had taken her sleeping pill and retreated to the guest room before I dialed the number from the note. It rang 3 times before a woman answered, her voice clinical yet kind. "Elise Morgan?" she asked, as if she'd been expecting my call. "Yes," I whispered, suddenly afraid Caroline might hear, despite the closed door and the sound machine she used religiously. "Who is this?" "My name is Special Agent Diana Reeves. I worked with your parents." The simple statement collapsed the floor beneath me. My parents, the butterfly scientist and the art teacher, had worked with the FBI? "There's been a mistake," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "My parents died in a car accident last year. They didn't." "Your parents are not dead, Elise," Agent Reeves said, each word precise and measured. "They're in witness protection, and you were never supposed to be left behind." The room tilted sharply. I gripped the edge of my desk, knuckles white. "That's impossible. We had a funeral. I saw the accident report. There were details about the crash." "Fabricated," she replied, with the reluctant assistance of local authorities. "It was meant to be a temporary measure while we prepared extraction for all 3 of you. But something went wrong. Or rather, someone interfered." "Caroline." I breathed, the pieces beginning to align with sickening clarity. "We have reason to believe your aunt deliberately sabotaged your inclusion in the protection program," Agent Reeves confirmed. "She convinced the marshals that you had chosen to stay behind, that you were an adult capable of making that decision. By the time your parents discovered the deception, it was too complicated to extract you safely without compromising their new identities." My mind raced through 1,000 memories, recalibrating each one against this impossible new reality. The hushed phone calls Caroline would take in the garden, her insistence on answering the door herself, the way she discouraged me from pursuing freelance photography assignments that would take me out of state. "Why?" I asked, the question barely audible. "Why would she do that?" There was a pause on the line. "That's something we're still investigating, but we know it involves the testimony your parents gave against Axiom Industries 15 years ago. Your father discovered they were deliberately contaminating groundwater near their chemical plants and falsifying environmental reports. Your mother had documented evidence through a photography project she was doing on local wildlife deformities. My mother's art, my father's science, their ordinary passions that had apparently led them into extraordinary danger." "Caroline works for a lobbying firm," I said slowly, connections firing in my brain. "One that represents several pharmaceutical companies. Could Axiom be a client?" "Yes, though the relationship appears to be more complicated than that." Agent Reeves's tone sharpened. "Ms. Morgan, I need to be very clear. You're in danger. Your aunt's motives may not be limited to separating you from your parents." The implication hung in the silence between us. Caroline hadn't just stolen my family. She might be planning to silence me permanently. Perhaps she'd been waiting for something. An inheritance to clear, a statute of limitations to expire, or simply the right moment when my death would raise fewer questions. "What do I do?" I asked, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "Pack 1 bag. Essential documents only. A car will be at the end of your street in 30 minutes. Don't turn on any lights. Don't use your cell phone after we hang up. It's likely monitored." The instructions should have seemed melodramatic, the stuff of spy movies rather than real life. But after 13 months of fog, everything was suddenly terribly clear. The way Caroline checked my phone when she thought I wasn't looking, the security system she'd installed that required her personal code, the casual questions about my schedule, my friends, my future plans. "Can I see them?" I asked, the hope almost painful as it bloomed in my chest. "My parents?" Another pause. "That's not my decision to make, but I promise we'll discuss options once you're secure." She hesitated. "Elise, I knew your parents. They never stopped fighting to reach you. Remember that." The call ended, and with it, the last remnants of the life I had believed was mine. I moved on autopilot, grabbing my passport, birth certificate, and the flash drive where I stored my photography portfolio. I added my father's favorite field journal, and the small watercolor my mother had painted of our family home. Everything else was just things, replaceable. As I zipped the bag, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. I froze, eyes darting to the door I'd foolishly left unlocked in my distraction. The handle turned slowly, and Caroline appeared in the doorway, her silk robe belted tightly around her waist, her face a mask of concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Elise? Why are you up so late, sweetheart?" Her gaze dropped to the bag on my bed, and something cold and calculating flickered across her features before she composed herself. "Are you going somewhere?" 13 months of grief and confusion crystallized into a single, clarifying moment of rage. This woman had stolen my parents from me, had watched me cry at their empty caskets, had held my hand and told me time would heal all wounds, all while ensuring the wound would never close. I couldn't sleep. I lied, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain she could hear it. I thought I'd organize some of Mom and Dad's things. Finally face it, you know. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. "Oh, honey, it's nearly midnight. That can wait until morning, can't it? Let me make you some of that herbal tea you like." She stepped toward me, hand outstretched, and it took everything in me not to recoil. Instead, I nodded, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. "That would be nice." "Thank you." As she turned toward the stairs, I caught a glimpse of something tucked into her robe pocket, something that glinted metal in the dim light. The realization hit me with physical force. Caroline was armed. Agent Reeves's warning hadn't been paranoia, it had been deadly accurate. My aunt had no intention of letting me leave this house alive. I had 20 minutes until my extraction, and absolutely nowhere to hide. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but survival required strategy. I watched Caroline descend the stairs, her movements unnaturally fluid for someone who'd supposedly been asleep moments ago. Had she been waiting? Listening? The thought sent fresh adrenaline coursing through my veins. I needed to buy time and create distance between us. "Actually," I called down, "I'm going to take a quick shower first." Feeling a bit anxious. Her pause was almost imperceptible. "Of course, dear. I'll have the tea ready when you're done." The bathroom door locked, a flimsy barrier, but it would give me warning. I turned the shower on full blast, then frantically assessed my options. The window was too small to climb through, and the drop to the garden below would likely result in a broken ankle. My phone was compromised. The house had only one staircase. I was trapped. Then my gaze fell on the heating vent near the floor. The same vent my father had used years ago to create an elaborate treasure hunt for my birthday, sending clues through the old house's ductwork system. I'd been 12 then, delighted by the way he'd mapped the forgotten airways of our Victorian home. "Always know your escape routes," he'd joked, not knowing how prophetic those words would become. Working quickly, I unscrewed the vent cover with the edge of my tweezers, grateful that Carolyn's obsessive renovation plans hadn't yet reached the upstairs bathroom. The duct was narrow but navigable, especially for someone with my slight frame. I stuffed my essentials into a small waterproof bag, tied my hair back, and crawled into the darkness, pulling the vent cover loosely back into place behind me. The metal was cold against my palms as I inched forward, using my elbows to distribute my weight and minimize noise. Years of contorting myself to photograph elusive wildlife in unforgiving terrain had prepared me for this moment, in ways I couldn't have imagined. I followed the duck's path toward what I remembered was my father's study, now Caroline's home office, and directly above the side door that led to the garden. Through the thin metal, I could hear Caroline moving around the kitchen, the clink of a spoon against ceramic, the soft murmur of her voice. Was she talking to herself? I paused, straining to listen, becoming suspicious. She was saying, her tone clipped and professional, nothing like the saccharine concern she used with me. "No, I don't think she knows anything concrete, but I found her in the attic again yesterday." "Yes, I'm handling it tonight. The tea is already prepared." No bodies, no questions. just like we discussed. Cold horror washed over me. She was on the phone, calmly discussing my murder as if it were a business transaction. The person on the other end, whoever they were, had been part of this plan all along. How many people were involved in this conspiracy? How far did it reach? I continued my slow progress, more determined than ever. The duct narrowed as it approached a junction, forcing me to contort at an uncomfortable angle. A sharp edge caught my arm, slicing skin. I bit back a gasp, freezing as blood trickled warm down my wrist. The sound of footsteps below grew louder, then stopped directly beneath me. "Elise?" Caroline called, her voice echoing up the stairwell. "Your tea is getting cold." I held my breath, willing my racing heart to quiet. 1 minute passed. 2. The floorboards creaked as she climbed the stairs, each step measured and deliberate. "Elise, you're being rude." Her voice had hardened, the pretense of affection thinning. I heard the bathroom door handle jiggle, then a sharper, more insistent rattle. "Open this door right now." Silence, then the unmistakable sound of something heavy hitting wood. She was trying to break in. I scrambled forward with new urgency, abandoning caution for speed. The duct groaned under my weight, metal flexing. I froze, but it was too late. "What the?" Caroline's voice cut off, replaced by rapidly approaching footsteps. She'd heard. She knew. I abandoned stealth entirely, crawling as fast as the confined space would allow. The duct widened as it reached the junction above her office. I could see light filtering through the slats of another vent cover just ahead. Behind me, a crash and splintering of wood told me Carolyn had broken through the bathroom door. "Elise!" Her scream was primal, rage obliterating the last vestiges of her carefully constructed mask. "There's nowhere to go, do you hear me? Nowhere!" I reached the vent, fingers scrabbling at the screws. They wouldn't budge. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I heard drawers being yanked open in the bathroom. She was looking for tools, trying to figure out where I'd gone. I had seconds, not minutes. With desperate strength, I kicked at the vent cover. Once, twice. On the third blow, it gave way, clattering to the floor of the office below. I wiggled through the opening, dropping awkwardly onto Caroline's desk and sending papers flying. Pain shot through my ankle as I landed, but adrenaline dulled it to a manageable throb. Her office was a revelation. One wall covered entirely with surveillance monitors showing different angles of the house, including my bedroom and the bathroom I'd just fled. Another held a massive corkboard with photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings, all connected by red string. At the center was a faded news article. Axiom Industries cleared of environmental charges. No time to process. I limped to the side door, fumbling with the unfamiliar lock. Through the window, I could see a dark sedan idling at the end of the street. My extraction, right on time. Freedom was 30 seconds and 50 yards away. The lock finally gave way. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the cool night air, trying to ignore the stabbing pain in my ankle. Behind me, Caroline's footsteps thundered down the stairs. I pushed off the porch steps, forcing my injured leg to cooperate as I zigzagged through the garden's dense shrubbery. Another of my father's legacies, planted to attract the butterflies he studied. "Stop her!" Caroline's voice rang out, and to my horror, I saw a man emerge from the shadows near the garage, moving to intercept me. I veered sharply left, vaulting over the low stone wall that separated our property from the neighbors. My ankle screamed in protest, but I kept moving, cutting across the adjacent lawn toward the street. Headlights flashed once from the waiting sedan, a signal. I sprinted the final distance, lungs burning. The rear door swung open as I approached, and I flung myself inside, collapsing against the leather seat. "Go!" I gasped, and the car accelerated smoothly, tires hardly making a sound on the asphalt. I turned to see Caroline standing in the middle of the street, her silk robe billowing around her like some vengeful spirit, a gun now clearly visible in her outstretched hand. Her face, illuminated briefly by the car's taillights, was contorted with a hatred so pure it barely looked human. Then we turned the corner, and she disappeared from view. "Are you injured?" The driver's voice was calm, professional. "Just my ankle. I think it's sprained, not broken." I was shaking uncontrollably now, delayed shock setting in. Who are you? Agent Michaels. We've got about 20 minutes before we switch vehicles. Can you hold on until then? I nodded, wrapping my arms around myself as if I could physically hold together the pieces of my shattering reality. We drove in silence through the sleeping town, taking a convoluted route that doubled back on itself several times to ensure we weren't followed. My mind raced with questions, each more urgent than the last, but I couldn't seem to form words. Finally, Agent Michaels spoke again. Agent Reeves is waiting at the safe house. She'll explain everything. My parents? I managed to say. Are they really? His eyes met mine briefly in the rearview mirror. Alive? Yes. Safe? Also yes. Beyond that, it's not my place to say. We switched cars in the empty parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store, transferring quickly to an unremarkable SUV with tinted windows. A woman was waiting in the driver's seat, her features sharp and alert. She handed me a first aid kit without a word, and I wrapped my ankle as we merged onto the highway, heading north. 3 hours and another vehicle change later, we arrived at what appeared to be an abandoned ranger station deep in the national forest. The building was dark, but as we approached, motion sensor lights illuminated a gravel path. Agent Reeves was waiting in the doorway, her tall frame silhouetted against the warm light behind her. You made it, she said, relief evident in her voice. We weren't sure you would. Caroline tried to stop me, I said, the words inadequate to describe the nightmarish revelation that the woman who had claimed to be caring for me had instead been my jailer, my potential executioner. Come inside, Agent Reeves replied, stepping back to let us pass. We have a lot to discuss. The interior of the ranger station had been converted into a command center of sorts, with computers, communications equipment, and a large table covered with maps and documents. A kitchenette in the corner held a coffee maker that looked like it hadn't stopped running in days. Agent Reeves guided me to a chair, then carefully examined my injured ankle. It's not broken, she confirmed, but you'll need to stay off it for a few days. We've got time, though not as much as I'd like. Time for what? I asked, accepting the mug of tea she offered, then hesitating, remembering Caroline's poisoned brew. Agent Reeves noticed my reluctance and took a deliberate sip from the mug before handing it back. Time to bring you up to speed and prepare you for what comes next, she said, settling into the chair across from me. Your parents testified against Axiom Industries 15 years ago in what should have been a straightforward environmental crimes case. Your father had documented systematic contamination of groundwater near their chemical facilities, and your mother had photographic evidence of the impact on local wildlife. My mother was an art teacher, I said, still struggling to reconcile these new facts with the parents I'd known. Agent Reeves smiled slightly. She was. She was also an exceptionally talented environmental photographer who worked with several conservation organizations. Your father's research complemented her visual documentation. Together, they built an irrefutable case against Axiom. But the article in Caroline's office said Axiom was cleared of charges. They were, eventually. After key evidence disappeared, witnesses recanted, and the judge, who had financial ties to Axiom that weren't disclosed until years later, dismissed the case. Her expression hardened. That wasn't coincidence. Axiom is owned by the Westfield family. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Westfield, as in Caroline Westfield? My aunt owns Axiom. Not directly. She's the younger sister of Richard Westfield, the CEO. Your mother was the middle child who rejected the family business and its flexible ethics. The sisters were estranged for years before the case, but the trial severed whatever relationship remained. I struggled to process this information. So my mother testified against her own family's company, and they tried to, kill her for it? There was an attempt, yes, which is why we had to move quickly to place your parents in witness protection. The plan was to extract all three of you, but Caroline intervened, convincing the marshals that you had chosen to stay behind to finish college. I was 19, I whispered, remembering the terrible emptiness of that year, struggling through classes, trying to build a career, all while missing my parents with an ache that never subsided. I would have gone with them in a heartbeat. They knew that, Agent Reeves said gently. When they discovered Caroline's deception, they wanted to risk everything to come back for you. We had to physically restrain your father from breaking protocol. It would have exposed not only them but several other witnesses in related cases. So they just left me with her? The woman who helped frame them? Anger flared, hot and unexpected. They had no choice, Elise. And we've been watching you. Why do you think your freelance photography career took off so suddenly 2 years ago? Those National Geographic assignments didn't come your way by accident. I stared at her, connecting dots I'd never seen before. My inexplicable big break photographing endangered species in remote locations. The surprising ease with which I'd secured international assignments despite my limited experience. The anonymous donor who'd funded my expedition to document butterfly migration patterns, my father's passion. You were setting me up to leave the country, I realized, creating opportunities for me to be away from Caroline. Agent Reeves nodded. We needed to establish a pattern of international travel that wouldn't raise suspicions. The plan was to extract you during your upcoming assignment in Costa Rica, but then we intercepted communications suggesting Caroline was accelerating her timeline. The tea, I said, shuddering at how close I'd come to drinking it. Yes, we had to move tonight. She hesitated, then reached for a manila folder on the table. There's something else you need to see. She slid a document toward me, a death certificate. My death certificate, dated 3 days in the future. Cause of death, accidental overdose. They've been planning this for months, Agent Reeves explained, her voice gentle but firm. Your grief over your parents' deaths would provide the perfect cover for a tragic accident or suicide. Caroline has already planted evidence. Prescription medications in your name, a therapist's notes documenting your increasing depression, emails to friends expressing hopelessness. My stomach lurched. She can forge all that? With the resources of Axiom behind her? Easily. The Westfield family doesn't just own chemical companies. They have tentacles in pharmaceuticals, digital security, even certain areas of law enforcement. The scale of the conspiracy against my family was almost incomprehensible. What happens now? Agent Reeves straightened, her expression shifting from sympathetic to determined. Now we move to phase 2. For the past 15 years, we've been building a RICO case against Axiom and the entire Westfield operation. Your parents. Environmental evidence was just the tip of the iceberg. We've documented money laundering, bribery of government officials, illegal disposal of toxic waste, and at least 3 suspicious deaths of former employees who raised concerns. She pushed another folder toward me. What we haven't had is someone who can conclusively tie Caroline to the conspiracy. Someone with direct evidence of her actions and motives. I opened the folder to find photographs of myself, sleeping in my bed, working at my desk, even hiking on trails I'd thought were deserted. All taken from hidden angles, all clearly without my knowledge. Caroline has been documenting you for months, Agent Reeves continued, building her own evidence trail to support whatever story she planned to tell after your death. But in doing so, she's created a record of her surveillance. If we can access her complete files, the ones stored in her home office, we'd have the final piece of evidence needed to bring down the entire operation. I stared at her, understanding dawning. You want me to go back? Not physically, she clarified quickly, but we need you to help us navigate her security systems remotely. The office you escaped from tonight contains a server with encrypted files that could break this case wide open. Our tech team can handle the hacking, but we need someone who knows the house, who can guide them through the layout and help identify potential security measures. And after that? I asked, afraid to voice the question that mattered most. Agent Reeves's expression softened. After that, if all goes well, there's someone who's been waiting a very long time to see you. She nodded to one of the other agents who typed briefly on a laptop. A secure video call connected, the screen initially showing only static before resolving into an image that stole my breath away. My parents. They looked older, of course. My father's dark hair now liberally streaked with silver, My mother's laugh lines deeper than I remembered, but their eyes, wide and shining with unshed tears, were exactly the same. For a moment, none of us spoke, the weight of 13 lost years hanging in the air between us. "Elise," my mother finally whispered, her voice breaking on my name. "My beautiful girl." "We never stopped fighting to reach you," my father added, echoing Agent Reeves's earlier words. "Never stopped looking for a way to bring you home." Home! The word resonated through me, carrying echoes of everything I'd lost, and might now, impossibly, regain. I reached out, my fingers brushing the screen as if I could somehow bridge the distance between us. "I'm coming," I promised, tears streaming freely down my face. "Whatever it takes. I'm coming home." Dawn broke over the forest as we finalized our plan. The command center had transformed into a hub of focused energy, with agents moving purposefully between workstations. My ankle had been properly wrapped, my cuts cleaned and bandaged. The physical pain had receded to a dull throb, overshadowed by the emotional whiplash of the past 12 hours. "The operation begins at noon," Agent Reeves announced, gathering everyone around the central table, where a detailed floor plan of my childhood home was displayed. "Elise will guide our tech team through Caroline's security systems remotely, while our field agents establish surveillance positions around the property." I studied the blueprint, memories flooding back with new context. The hidden safe behind my father's collection of first edition butterfly guides. The mysterious electrical upgrades Caroline had insisted on after moving in. The decorative sensors on every window that I'd assumed were part of the security system she'd installed to protect me. "Caroline leaves every Thursday at 11:30 for her standing lunch with Richard Westfield," I explained, pointing to the service entrance at the rear of the house. "She deactivates the internal sensors but keeps the perimeter alarm active. The code changes weekly, but she keeps it written in her planner under the guise of random phone numbers." "That fits her psychological profile," commented Agent Lowe, the team's behavioral analyst. "Hyper-controlled individuals often rely on physical records rather than digital ones, especially for sensitive information. They trust their own systems above all else." I nodded, remembering Caroline's meticulous handwritten schedules, her distrust of cloud storage, her insistence on printing important emails. What I'd interpreted as old-fashioned habits had been calculated security measures. The realization made me shiver, how completely I'd misread her, how blindly I'd accepted her presence in my life. "Once we're in, we'll have approximately 90 minutes before she returns," Agent Reeves continued. "The server in her office requires biometric authentication, but our analysis of her routine suggests she doesn't re-authenticate after lunch. The session should remain active." "And if it doesn't?" I asked, the knot in my stomach tightening. "We have contingencies," she assured me, though her expression remained grave. "But let's focus on the primary plan. You'll be working with Agent Patel, guiding him through any unexpected obstacles." Agent Patel, a slight man with quick eyes and quicker fingers, gave me a reassuring nod. "I've been studying the systems in place based on our surveillance. Your insights will be invaluable for navigating anything we haven't anticipated." The weight of responsibility settled heavy on my shoulders. This wasn't just about reuniting with my parents. It was about bringing down a corporate empire built on corruption and violence. An empire that had destroyed countless lives beyond just my family's. The environmental damage alone from Axiom's illegal practices had likely caused incalculable harm to communities I'd never even heard of. "What about after?" I asked, voicing the question that had been haunting me since seeing my parents on the video call. "Assuming this works, assuming we get the evidence, what happens to them?" "To me?" Agent Reeves exchanged glances with her superior, a silver-haired woman who had been introduced simply as Director Lawson. The director nodded once, giving permission for whatever came next. "Your parents have been living under assumed identities in a small coastal town in Washington state," Agent Reeves explained. "Your father works as a conservation consultant for a marine research facility. Your mother teaches art at the local community college. They've built a life there, a good one, despite the circumstances." She paused, watching my reaction carefully. "If we succeed today, if we secure the evidence needed to prosecute the Westfields, your parents can finally reclaim their identities. They can acknowledge their past without fear of reprisal." but they can never return to their old lives entirely. Too much time has passed. Too many new connections have formed. What she's saying, Director Lawson interjected, her voice gentle but direct, is that reunification would mean joining them in their new life, not them returning to yours. Your career, your home, your identity as Elise Morgan, all of that would need to be left behind. The reality of what they were asking struck me with physical force. I would be abandoning everything I'd built over the past 13 years. My growing reputation as a wildlife photographer, the professional connections I'd struggled to establish, the few friendships I'd maintained despite Caroline's interference. Yet what were those things compared to reclaiming my family? What was professional success worth when measured against 13 years of stolen time with the people who had shaped my very being? I understand, I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm ready. Director Lawson studied me for a long moment before nodding. Then, let's begin. The next hours passed in a blur of technical preparations. Agent Patel walked me through the specialized software I would use to guide him, ensuring I understood each component. Other agents briefed me on communication protocols, contingency plans, worst-case scenarios. Throughout it all, I fought to maintain focus, to absorb every critical detail despite my exhaustion and the emotional turmoil still raging beneath my composed exterior. At precisely 11:42 a.m., confirmation came through. Caroline had left for her lunch meeting. Field agents reported her Mercedes turning onto the highway toward the city, followed at a discreet distance by an unmarked FBI vehicle. Phase 1 was underway. I sat beside Agent Patel, headset secure, hands steady on the keyboard. On one monitor, I could see the live feed from a tiny camera concealed in his glasses as he approached the rear entrance of my childhood home. On another, the security system interface we would need to bypass. "Talk me through it," he murmured, his voice calm in my ear. "The service entrance keypad has a false panel," I explained, watching as his camera focused on the innocuous-looking security system. "Press the top right corner twice, then the bottom left once. It should reveal a secondary keypad." He followed my instructions, and sure enough, the panel slid aside to reveal a more sophisticated entry system. The code should be in Caroline's planner on her desk. Look for today's date and a series of numbers disguised as a phone contact. While another agent retrieved the planner, I guided Agent Patel through the kitchen to the study. Every familiar corner of the house looked different through his camera, sinister rather than comforting, each shadow potentially concealing another of Caroline's security measures. I forced myself to focus on the task at hand, not on the surreal experience of seeing my home through a stranger's eyes. "Got it," came the voice of Agent Rivera. "Today's entry shows a contact for Dr. Maxwell, with the number 8479213. "That's it," I confirmed, the pattern immediately recognizable. "The first 3 digits are just misdirection. The actual code is 9213. Agent Patel entered the numbers into the secondary keypad. A soft beep and a flashing green light indicated success. We were in. The next 45 minutes were a masterclass in precision and teamwork. I guided the agents through the house, pointing out hidden cameras, pressure sensors in the floorboards, and the elaborate security surrounding Caroline's office. When the server required not just her fingerprint but a vocal password, Agent Liu was able to use previously gathered surveillance to construct a convincing audio simulation of Caroline saying, "Kingfisher Rising," the same operation name that had been stamped on the photograph that started this journey. "We're in," Agent Patel announced, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he began copying the encrypted files. Estimated download time: 17 minutes. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. 17 minutes. After 13 years of separation, after a lifetime built on lies, the truth was just 17 minutes away. "Elise," Agent Rivera's urgent voice cut through my relief. "We've got movement on the perimeter." A black SUV just turned onto the property. Cold dread washed over me. That's not possible. Caroline never returns early from these lunches. It's her sacred time with her brother. "It's not Caroline," Director Lawson said, her voice tight as she studied the surveillance feed. "It's Richard Westfield." And he's not alone. The camera showed 3 men exiting the vehicle, their movements purposeful and controlled. Even through the grainy security footage, I could see the telltale bulges of concealed weapons beneath their expensive suits. "They know," I whispered, horrified understanding dawning. "Somehow, they know we're here." "Patel, what's your status?" Director Lawson demanded. 12 minutes remaining on the transfer. He reported, tension evident despite his professional tone. "But I can extract now with what we have so far." "No," I interrupted, decision crystallizing with surprising clarity. "We need all of it. The partial files might not be enough to bring them down completely." "Elise is right," Agent Reeves agreed. "We get one shot at this. It has to be comprehensive." Director Lawson's expression was grim as she assessed the rapidly deteriorating situation. "Rivera, Chen, intercept the incoming hostiles. Buy Patel as much time as you can, without engaging directly if possible. Remember, these are civilians, no matter how dangerous." The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. Through the surveillance cameras, I watched as Agents Rivera and Chen emerged from their hidden positions, badges displayed, officially ordering Westfield and his men to leave the property. Predictably, the corporate titan was unimpressed by federal authority, gesturing angrily as his security personnel flanked him protectively. 7 minutes. Agent Patel updated, his voice tight with concentration. On screen, the confrontation was escalating. One of Westfield's men had his hand inside his jacket, clearly reaching for his weapon. Agent Rivera had adopted a defensive stance, her own hand hovering near her service pistol. The standoff couldn't last much longer. 5 minutes, Patel reported. A new vehicle appeared on the surveillance feed, Caroline's Mercedes, returning far earlier than expected. My heart sank. The carefully orchestrated plan was unraveling by the second. She must have been alerted. Agent Leo theorized. Probably has her own surveillance monitoring the property remotely. 3 minutes, Patel announced, his typing becoming more frantic. Outside, Caroline had joined her brother, her face contorted with rage as she gesticulated toward the house. The siblings conferred briefly before Caroline pulled something from her purse, not a weapon, but what appeared to be a small electronic device. "It's a remote system override," I realized aloud. "She's going to shut down the server remotely." Director Lawson barked orders for immediate extraction, but we all knew it might be too late. On the screen, Caroline raised the device, her thumb hovering over the central button. 1 minute, Patel said, his voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Caroline pressed the button. The screens flickered but didn't go dark. Agent Patel's hands never paused in their rhythm across the keyboard. "Transfer complete," he announced, triumph evident in his voice. "I've got everything." Relief crashed through me with such force that I nearly collapsed. On the surveillance feed, confusion played across Caroline's features as she repeatedly pressed the remote's button to no effect. What she couldn't know was that while guiding the agents through her security system, I had remembered my father's old contingency plan, a secondary power source he'd installed during a period of frequent outages, connected to the home's main electrical system through a hidden junction box in the basement. I'd directed Agent Chen to locate and activate it during the initial sweep of the house, creating a backup power supply that Caroline's remote couldn't override. My father's foresight, combined with my memories of the house's secrets, had outmaneuvered the woman who thought she knew everything about controlling my life. "All agents, extract immediately," Director Lawson ordered. Rendezvousing at Point Charlie in 15 minutes. Through the camera feed, I watched Agent Patel pocket the drive containing the downloaded files, then slip out through a side entrance while Agents Rivera and Chen maintained their confrontation with the Westfields at the front of the property. Caroline was now screaming at her brother, her carefully maintained facade of sophistication completely shattered. "This is your fault." I could see her mouthing, though the exterior cameras had no audio. "You said she was contained." Richard Westfield's response was lost as he turned away, but his body language conveyed barely controlled fury. One of his security personnel spoke urgently into a wrist microphone, likely calling for backup. But it was too late. Our agents were already clearing the property perimeter, the critical evidence secured. Within the hour, we had regrouped at the secondary safe house, a nondescript farmhouse surrounded by acres of open fields that would make any approach immediately visible. The encrypted files had been transferred to secured FBI servers, and the decryption process had begun. Early results were promising. Financial records documenting millions in bribes to government officials, internal memos discussing the deliberate falsification of environmental impact studies, and most damning of all, explicit communications between Carolyn and Richard Westfield about removing obstacles, including detailed plans for my parents, forced disappearance, and, more recently, my own orchestrated accident. "This is everything we needed and more," Agent Reeves confirmed, her professional demeanor finally relaxing into something like satisfaction. "The Westfield siblings will be in custody by nightfall, along with at least a dozen executives and corrupt officials implicated in these files." "And Axiom?" I asked, thinking of all the communities that had suffered from their toxic practices. "The company itself will face federal charges, massive fines, and mandatory remediation of affected areas," Director Lawson explained. "More importantly, the evidence exposes a pattern of corruption that will trigger investigations into similar corporations nationwide. Your parents' original testimony was just the beginning. What we've uncovered today could transform environmental regulation enforcement for decades to come." The magnitude of what we'd accomplished was almost too large to grasp. What had begun as my personal nightmare had expanded into a watershed moment for corporate accountability. Yet amid the broader implications, my thoughts remained fixed on the two people whose lives had been stolen alongside mine. "When can I see them?" I asked simply. Director Lawson's stern expression softened. "We've already dispatched agents to secure your parents and transport them to a reunification site. Estimated arrival time is approximately 7 hours, assuming no complications." 7 hours. After 13 years, just 7 more hours. As the FBI team continued processing the intelligence windfall, I retreated to a quiet corner of the farmhouse, attempting to process the seismic shifts in my reality. My entire adult life had been shaped by lies, my career choices influenced by Caroline's subtle manipulations, my personal relationships limited by her interference, even my understanding of my own parents fundamentally distorted by her deception. Who might I have become if those 13 years hadn't been stolen? What path might I have taken if I'd had my parents' guidance through my 20s? The questions were unanswerable, the alternate timeline forever inaccessible. Yet as I watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks beyond the farmhouse window, I realized that dwelling on what might have been would only steal more time from us. The past was immutable, but the future remained unwritten. We had been granted that rarest of gifts, a second chance. Night had fallen by the time Agent Reeves approached me, her expression both solemn and expectant. "They're here," she said simply. I followed her through the farmhouse to a small sitting room at the back of the property. The door stood closed, unassuming white paint and a simple brass handle. Beyond it waited the resolution of 13 years of grief and confusion. "Take all the time you need," Agent Reeves said, stepping back respectfully. "We'll handle the remaining operational details." My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I paused, drawing a deep breath to steady myself, then pushed the door open. They were standing by the window, silhouetted against the moonlight, hands clasped together as they had been in so many of my childhood memories. At the sound of the door, they turned in unison, and for a moment we simply stared at each other across the gulf of lost years. My mother made a small, broken sound and stepped forward, arms outstretched. I moved without conscious thought, closing the distance between us in 3 quick steps. Then I was enfolded in her embrace, my father's arms wrapping around us both, the 3 of us clinging to each other, as if afraid a stronger force might tear us apart again. "My girl!" My mother whispered against my hair, her voice thick with tears. "My beautiful, brave girl." "We've missed so much," my father said, his familiar baritone cracking with emotion. "So many birthdays, graduations, achievements." "We're here now," I managed to say through my own tears. "We have time." We talked through the night, curled together on a worn sofa that reminded me of our old living room furniture. They told me about their life in witness protection, the small coastal town where they'd settled, the friends they'd made despite the necessary distance they had to maintain, the moments of joy they'd found amid the constant ache of my absence. I shared stories of my photography career, the places I'd traveled, the wildlife I'd documented, carefully editing out Caroline's manipulative presence in my narrative. "We saw your work," my father confessed, his eyes shining with pride. "Agent Reeves would bring us your published photos. That series on endangered monarch habitats, I knew immediately it was influenced by my research." "I was trying to feel close to you," I admitted. "Even believing you were gone, I wanted to continue what you'd started." "And now you can," my mother said, squeezing my hand. "We can. Together." As dawn broke over the farmhouse, Agent Reeves returned with news. Caroline and Richard Westfield had been taken into custody, along with several Axiom executives and 2 federal officials implicated in the cover-up. The siblings had been arrested at Caroline's house, where they'd been destroying evidence. Too little, too late. Initial court appearances were scheduled for the following week, with federal prosecutors confident in securing indictments on dozens of charges, ranging from conspiracy to attempted murder. "What happens to us now?" I asked, looking between Agent Reeves and my parents. "You have options," she explained. "Your parents' witness protection identities have been well established over the past 13 years. You could join them under a new identity of your own, continuing their life in Washington." My mother's hand tightened around mine at the suggestion, her hope palpable. "Alternatively," Agent Reeves continued, "with the Westfields in custody and Axiom facing dissolution, the immediate threat to your family has significantly diminished. You could all reclaim your legal identities and relocate together, starting fresh somewhere new. Or," my father said cautiously, "your mother and I could return to our legal identities while you maintain your current life. Your career is flourishing, Elise. We wouldn't ask you to abandon everything you've built." The choice seemed impossible at first glance. Abandon my established identity and career, or maintain painful distance from the parents I'd just reclaimed. But as I looked between their dear, familiar faces, I realized the answer had been clear from the moment I'd received that FBI envelope. "I want us to be together," I said firmly. "Whether that means new names or old ones, new places or familiar ones, I don't care. What matters is that we're no longer separated." The relief in their expressions was immediate and profound. My mother pulled me close again, whispering, "Thank you," against my temple. In the end, we chose a middle path. My parents reclaimed their legal identities, while I maintained mine professionally but adopted their reclaimed surname. We relocated to a small university town in Colorado, where my father accepted a position heading an environmental research center, and my mother established a studio teaching both art and photography. I continued my wildlife photography career, now enhanced by legitimate collaboration with my father on conservation projects that had once been my way of honoring his memory. The Westfield siblings trial became one of the most significant corporate criminal cases in decades. I testified about Caroline's surveillance and manipulation, my testimony corroborated by the extensive documentation recovered from her server. Richard Westfield's network of corruption implicated dozens more individuals across multiple industries, each new revelation deepening public outrage and strengthening calls for corporate accountability. 1 year after that fateful envelope arrived on my doorstep, I stood with my parents on the courthouse steps after the jury delivered guilty verdicts on all counts. Caroline and Richard Westfield faced decades in prison, their empire dismantled, their fortune largely seized for victim restitution and environmental remediation. "It's really over," my mother said, wonder in her voice as we watched federal marshals lead the siblings away in handcuffs. "Not over," my father corrected gently. "Just beginning." He was right. The conclusion of the trial wasn't an ending but a threshold, the start of our reclaimed lives together. The past 13 years had been stolen from us, but they had also shaped us in ways that couldn't be undone. My parents were no longer exactly the people I remembered, and I had grown from their sheltered daughter into a woman who had survived betrayal and isolation. Yet as we walked away from the courthouse, arms linked together in the spring sunshine, I understood that what mattered wasn't recapturing what we'd lost, but building something new from the foundation of our enduring love for each other. The lies that had separated us had been exposed and judged. The truth that bound us had emerged stronger for having been tested. Every family has its secrets, its unspoken histories. Ours had been weaponized against us, nearly destroying us in the process. But in revealing those secrets, in bringing the darkness into light, we had reclaimed not just our relationships, but our power to define our own story. That night, as we celebrated with a quiet dinner in our new home, my father raised his glass in a toast. To truth, he said simply, and to the courage to face it no matter how painful. To family, my mother added, her eyes shining with tears and joy in equal measure. The one we choose, not the one we're given. I lifted my own glass, heart full beyond words. To second chances, I said, and making every moment count from here forward. We clinked glasses, the sound bright and clear in the warm kitchen. Outside, stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, constants that had witnessed our separation and now our reunion. Whatever came next, we would face it together. No more secrets, no more lies, just the honest complexity of three lives intertwining after too long apart. Some stories end with justice, others with reconciliation. Ours had both, but more importantly, it had continuation, the precious gift of time restored, of possibilities renewed, of love reclaimed from the shadow of betrayal. Not an ending at all, but the truest kind of beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.